Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Ginger Olszewski, and I'm here to welcome you to our Pat Conway Literary Center, where we're honored to host tonight's event with Carol Lucas, author of A Breath Away, One Woman's Journey Through Widowhood. Carol's memoir is a powerful story of healing and personal growth, following the loss of her husband to an incurable disease. Despite the subject matter, Carol's writing is empoweringly upbeat, sometimes humorous, and always positive in its message of hope and transcendence. A retired English teacher, Carol grew up in Western Pennsylvania, where she also earned her college degree. She went on to do graduate work at the University of Notre Dame. After graduating, she started teaching in Pittsburgh and lived there for 35 years. On retirement, she received an Excellence in Teaching Award from the state of Pennsylvania. She now lives here in Beaufort, South Carolina, where she is an active member of our community of writers. Copies of Carol's memoir will be available for sale and signing after tonight's presentation. Please welcome me and join me, Carol Lucas.
When I stand in front of people, I'm not used to applause. Having taught school for 32 years, applause was not always guaranteed. That having been said, I will add a brief note to that and say that I loved every moment that I taught. Well, maybe every moment's a stretch, but I did love teaching. I just told Jonathan here earlier tonight that I could not teach in today's classroom. I'm sure I would be in jail by the end of the week. So being the disciplinarian that I am, that would not go over so well. First, let me thank you so much for coming this evening. I appreciate the effort that you made to get here and the interest that you must have in the book. I asked myself a couple of times, should I pose the question of how many of you are widows or widowers for that matter? And I've had 2 other book signings, and I've said, do you want to ask that or don't you? And I have hesitated to do so simply because I don't think that we need to identify ourselves with the tag of widow. I think that we move beyond that. Is it a horrific sorority to which we have been destined to join? Yes, it is. But I think that as we work through our grief and we somehow find a way, because I'll tell you, the alternative isn't stellar. We can sit in the corner and decide that we're not going to do anything about our situation. And nobody wants that. Nobody. I see familiar faces here, and I am so happy. Happy is the only word I can use to see people who are here on a repeat situation, having been to other book signings. And there is, I would say to you that there is a section, there's a chapter in my book that deals with your female friends. And I was one, unfortunately, and I do not say it with pride, but I was one that found male friends more interesting. I'm sorry, they just were. I was not one when I had children to want to talk about diapers and formula. I wasn't. And so, as a result, I tended to be a bit dismissive of my female friends. And it isn't that I didn't have female friends, because I did. But there was something that drew me to the male conversation. That's all I will say. It wasn't that I was flirtatious or anything like that. It was just one of those things that I found it to be more edifying, I guess, or at least so I thought. when my husband passed away, I had heard so many women say previously that they suddenly found themselves in a position where they weren't being invited. They weren't being included. I can never say that. I have friends, one of whom sits right here in the front, and a dear, she couldn't have been more supportive if I had bound her up and said, you have to be my friend. But she, and so many others. I had a couple that 7 was never too many at the dining, at a dinner table. I have heard the lament from other women who say, suddenly I'm persona non grata. And that's something that I can't key in on. But I would say to you, if you purchase the book, if you read the book more accurately, do take a look and pay close attention to the chapter on the female factor, because your female friends were lifesavers, absolute lifesavers. Okay, I'm always wondering what I should read. If they say, oh, you have to read part of your book. I have chosen to read my letter to the reader, and I don't want to ruin it for anyone, but you'll read it again. Dear reader, please know that this message is not a disclaimer. Every word that you are about to read has been chosen carefully with an eye to unvarnished fact and to truth. Above all, truth. Yes, the book is rife with emotion. One cannot write about great loss without exposing pain, and pain is very emotional. While I admit that impassioned events can sometimes blur the lines of reality, I believe I have been obsessive about rendering a work that isn't drowning in sadness. In fact, I hope you will appreciate the humor that appears within these pages every bit as much as the story itself, because I too experienced many times of laughter when it seemed as though I would never smile again. I know there are those of you who will approach the book with feelings and beliefs that range from skepticism to cynicism regarding after-death communication, and that's all right. I certainly would have billed myself as a skeptic prior to my husband's passing. That said, I ask you to temporarily try to keep those feelings at bay as you read, and know that I have made every effort to be exceptionally true to the actual events. For readers who accept without question the kind of events that you are about to encounter, it is merely another adventure down a road with which you are already familiar. At one point, someone suggested that perhaps my book would sell more readily if I were to make it a fictional account. This would betray my husband in the worst possible way. And you will understand when you have read to the last page why I never even considered this suggestion. It has taken almost 2 decades to bring these pages together so that I might feel comfortable with every aspect of publicly, divulging the most important story of my life. It took me 17 years, folks. Nobody can accuse me of rushing. You need to understand. Most important, it is a story of love so powerful that I have been able to seek love again with a high degree of anticipation and without guilt. For those of you who have lost and yearn to believe you can love again, I hope this book starts you down the path of enlightenment and gives you hope. And finally, I'd ask that you please take time to read the quotations that appear at the beginning of every chapter. They are wonderful words, and they are written by people so much more insightful than I. words that speak to your soul. That was a fun part, if you can consider writing a book such as this as fun. And yes, there were times that it was fun. I shouldn't label it as such. But looking for the right quote to put before the appropriate chapter was edifying, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't believe there were so many wonderful, applicable quotes out there. But I will start with the prologue, and for those of you that have read, if you would love to chip in at some point, that's fine too. The prologue is entitled, "If You Must Go, Please Stay in Touch." And the quote that accompanies that is, "If ever there is tomorrow when we are not together, there is something you must always remember. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. But the most important thing is, even if we are apart, I will always be with you." And that's from Winnie the Pooh. It happened entirely too often. As I repeated the words I had used on numerous occasions before, my voice would choke and my eyes fill. "I want to go before you do, Noel. I want to be the one to die first. You have to promise me you will let me go first, because I don't think I could go on without you." I was 38 years old at the time. Hello. I was 38 years old at the time, and I know now that I was moving into a period of clinical depression that I would battle for well over a year before getting it under control. However, I viewed my persistent obsession as inexplicable apprehension that gnawed at me with increasing frequency. My sweet, patient husband would sigh and gird himself for still one more exchange on a subject that tortured me, and as a result brought torture of a different kind to him. "You would be fine, Carol, honestly. You would get along without me better than you think." This is the reassurance he always offered when I was hell-bent on broaching the topic of death, namely his. I'm sure his words were heavy with weariness had I bothered to pay attention. How many times had I relentlessly pushed him to engage in this conversation, acting always as though I had a new take on the subject. "No, Noel, I wouldn't. I know in my heart you could handle the loss better if I were to die first." "Well, I'm not sure why you think that, but you know this is a dumb conversation at best. Neither of us knows what will happen, and even if we did, we have no control over it." One day, I must have pushed the envelope a little farther than usual. "At least promise me that if you go first, you will try to contact me from the other side, if it is possible," I pleaded. "Absolutely," he replied. "If you feel something grab your ass, you'll notice me." And so that starts it off on a humorous note, and believe me, there is humor. I don't want you for a moment to think that the book is maudlin. I had a wonderful relationship with my husband. He and I were high school sweethearts. I was 15 and he was almost 17 when we started to date. We went to college together. In fact, he used to like to tell my mother, much to her dismay, that he had raised me the way he wanted me to be. But believe me, there was nothing about him that flaunted masculinity in terms of his having the say-so over me. That just wasn't the case. But anyway, I found that after our being together for 44 years, my adult life, my teenage life, my adult life that there was just a huge hole. We had moved here in 90, we moved into our home in 99, February of 99. And the following November, he was diagnosed with leukemia. And it was chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and ironically, so many doctors want to say, oh, if you have to have cancer, that's the good kind to have. I'm not sure how you bring that into juxtaposition, but good cancer never struck me as being anything except a contradiction of terms. He happened to have a particularly aggressive form of it, and so he was diagnosed in November. He passed away 17 months after that, and actually for a year he was asymptomatic, and then he had pneumonia, and all hell broke loose. He had pneumonia in December. We welcomed the turn of the century with feeling a sigh of relief, and by February he had another bout of pneumonia and ended up here in the hospital. I sought out a way to get him to Johns Hopkins because he was being treated by a specialist there. And we got a private plane, and he was absolutely adamant, Carol, we can't afford, we're not gonna do, and of course at that point I just simply ignored him. And we got a plane, took him by ambulance to the airport in Hilton Head. And I can remember walking onto the tarmac and seeing two planes there at that time, keeping in mind when it was. And one was a larger plane and one was a very small plane. And I was thinking, please God, let it be the larger plane. Well, it wasn't. It was a smaller one. And so we got onto the plane. The pilot wanted me to sit in the co-pilot seat, and my husband said, oh, go, sit there. Think how much fun. I said, no, if the plane goes down, I go before you do, and that's just not going to happen. But we got him there, and he had excellent care, and my belief is that if he had been supposed to make, if he should have made it, he would have, because he had excellent care there. But in any event, I found myself widowed at 58 years of age and wondering what I was going to do with my life. My friends from Pittsburgh, we had lived in Pittsburgh for 35 years, and they wanted to know if I was returning to Pittsburgh. And I said, have you looked at the weather forecast? They kind of got what I meant. And the answer really, as flippant as that was, the answer really was that I had a wonderful support system here. I could not have asked for finer friends who took care of me on so many levels that, you're never able to repay that kind of thing. But again, the book itself is an account of the time that occurred prior to his passing, and then it deals with the times that I went to Lilydale, New York. And I don't know, are there any of you that are familiar with Lilydale? Yes, okay. Let me tell you the background of that just for a little bit. My philosophy professor in college, we stayed in touch. His name is Dr. Frank Takei, and he and I stayed in touch by means of a Christmas card every year. He was just a great guy. Maybe, I'm trying to think, Frank might be about 8 years older, makes no difference. Anyway, whenever I sent the Christmas card and the letter, by then Noel had been diagnosed and I was just beside myself. And so he got back to me right away. And I firmly believe that people come into your life for a reason. They might come and they might wander out, and many come back again, and that's a wonderful thing. But Frank happens to own, along with his wife, a home in Lilydale. Lilydale, New York, is a home for many, many mediums. And believe me, I kept my skepticism firmly in place when I went. He invited me to come. He said, maybe you want to spend some time here and talk to a couple of people. And I know Frank's integrity, as well as that of his wife, well enough to know that it wasn't a case that there was feeding information to the mediums. And you'll read about both encounters in here, but the one in particular was kind of offhand. We had gone up to what they call the Forest Glen, and I listened to several readings, readings being done. And as I listened, there was that sense, and I'm sure you can understand this, there was that sense of, please come to me, please come to me. Oh God, no, don't come to me because I don't know what I'll do. That kind of thing. And so as a result, she didn't. None of them. There must have been 5 or 6 of them that were in this outdoor enclave. And so I was disappointed, but it was like, okay, Carol, you have the reading set up. Don't get yourself bent out of shape. So we went back to Frank's house, and we were sitting on the porch, and all of a sudden the door opens, and this one gal comes in, and I recognized her because she had been one of the mediums, and you'll appreciate this. They laugh and say that most of the mediums are overweight, so there's no such thing as a medium. So they too have a sense of humor, you have to understand. But in any event, she came in, and she apologized to me. She said, you know, I would have come to you because I did have a reading for you. But she said, the woman that I went to is dying of cancer, and she thinks she has but a month or so to live, and I wanted to let her know that she has more time to accomplish what she would like to accomplish. And I said, you know, what am I going to say? Well, no, I'm really ticked off that you no, of course I didn't say that. But anyway, she said to me, would you like to have the reading that I got for you? And I describe it in the book as being on the world's tallest roller coaster and not knowing how in the world I got there. And it's like, and I said, sure, by all means. When she started out, she said, your husband wants you to know that he's had 2 holes in one on the other side. Now, we could view that as being humorous, but I was devastated. I thought, she's going to make a mockery. She knew I'm from South Carolina. All right, you know, we're going to have a 50-50 shot of the whole idea of golfing. That was you talk about being skeptic. But then she said, and the look on my face, I can only believe the look on my face was one of disgust and upset. And she said, he says to tell you you're standing the wrong way. And at that point, she put her hands like this, and she moved this one back, and she said, he says, put your feet like this, because otherwise you're back too much, and she pantomimed a slice. Now, that got my attention, boys and girls, because that's exactly the way my husband tried to tutor me. He he would say to me, Carol, how many times have I said, you're doing this and you've gotta do, and he and I golf together all the time. So, little by little, the skepticism melted away. She had other things that were equally pertinent, but that one was, I mean, what are the chances? What are the chances? And so, she went on, and she told me other things, and they too, they weren't as specific, as focused as that. I had an appointment the next day with another medium, but I was so euphoric that evening that I thought, ooh, do I really want to go to another one, and maybe it won't be as good, and just 1,000 things racing through my mind. But I did. I went to the other one because Frank had actually said that, not that they are friends, but that they are neighbors, and he said she's the genuine article. So I said fine, and I drifted across the street and sat with another one. A lot of things that didn't register at the time, but I'm here to tell you, as I went back over and recapped in my own brain, there was no doubt in my mind, none whatsoever, that my husband was sending messages to me. Now, did I feel someone grab my ass? No, I did not. I'm sad to say that is from the prologue. Hasn't occurred, but we'll see. There's still time. There is still time. I'm not going to divulge a great amount, and Lord knows, I'm not going to stand here and read to you. You all look very capable of reading. But I certainly would field questions if there are any of you would like to pose a question or a comment. My friend Susan, hello dear.
I'm curious, I had the privilege of meeting Noel twice
Yes.
when we came to your home to look at it. We had the same builder, and then we became friends. I'm curious, over the years, if you feel like Noel comes to you more or not as often?
Not as often. And I really feel that is probably because, in fact, when I went to let me phrase it this way. When I went to Lilydale, I have trouble rolling that off my tongue. When I went there the third time, the gal that had given me the reading said to me, he's not coming to you as much, but that's because you don't need him as much. And I wanted to slap her and say, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I do need him around as much. But she was right. She was right. By that time, it was probably 5-6 years. And I didn't need that constant reinforcement. By that time, I believed very strongly. I mean, there were just so many things. I discussed dreams that are pertinent dreams that I see. You know how when you dream and sometimes you get up the next morning and it was so vivid that you could write a book about, well, not a book, but a story about it. Yeah. And then there are some that are so vague as to be, are you sure you really dreamt that or not? Pay attention to the vivid ones. They are, I believe strongly, communication. And I had lots of vivid ones. Some that were not so vivid, but lots of vivid ones. So yeah, less often, I would say. And perhaps that is his observation that I don't need quite as much as I did then. Because then, I mean, I was charts. Saddened, needless to say. Anyone else? Hi, Gail.
Would you talk a little bit about when you were sitting on the porch and the wind chimes started, when it was still out there?
Oh, yes. That was in May, and he passed away the 8th of April. I was sitting out on the porch with newspaper, and the wind chimes started. Now, let me digress momentarily and say that I had wind chimes that my father had made for me years and years ago. And we had them hung in Pittsburgh at the edge of a patio where there was a fair amount of wind. And every time they would ring, I would just offhandedly say, "That's my dad talking to me." And never thinking at all. But I was sitting on the porch in May, reading the newspaper, and the wind chimes that were my dad's, that Noel had hung out in an area where that we weren't getting the kind of wind we thought we might be getting. And so they started to chime, and I thought, oh, they must have a little bit of wind going on. And I looked, and there wasn't anything. So I went back to the paper, and they started again. And by that time, they were pronounced, I guess is the word I would say, that the ringing was pronounced. And I came down off the porch and started thinking, and I mean, I'm looking up because we have a fair amount of trees around our house. And I looked up, and there was not a leaf blowing, nothing. And I walked out to the chimes, and they stopped like that, just like that. I took it to mean what I guess I wanted it to mean, but it seemed a little bit too much to be coincidental. But you looked for the wind, and some, you know, it wasn't there to be seen. So yeah, that was early in the game, might I add. You know, that was a month after he passed away. Anyone else?
That was my question. Did you get signs before you met the mediums? And you just answered that question that you did, but.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
When you went to see the mediums.
Yes.
Where was it, Lilydale?
Yes.
I was wondering if that was the first time you got the signs, but you just explained that you
Oh,
got.
that I had
before
had
that.
prior to, yes.
That's my question.
And now I will tell you, the ones that I had prior to going to Lilydale, I still viewed with a bit of a jaded eye. It was hard for me to perceive. Now, I have a very good friend, childhood friend, who has always believed in the spiritual. She vows and declares that there were spirits in her home as she was growing up. And of course I laughed. When I say in here, I laughed and told her if I'd known that at the time, I wouldn't have been sleeping overnight there. But she went with me the first time to Lilydale. And she who is a believer, I mean, this was just her accompanying me, is what it amounted to. But even then, when I went, and I knew she and I were going to connect in Pennsylvania and go together to Lilydale that first time, I was at her house and sleeping overnight there, and we were going to leave from her place to go. I had a dream that I could see her looking for a part to the coffee pot, and she couldn't find it, and she was upset. She kept saying, I don't know where it's gone, blah, blah, blah. And I could see where I was sitting in the dream. That entire dream was actuated the next morning. And I told her this, and she said, I said, Martha, you cannot believe I had this exact dream last night. And she called it, and I've lost it now, but in essence, dreaming the future. Yeah.
Carol, tell them about the checkbook, which is a great story.
Oh,
In
the
the
checks,
kitchen,
oh yeah,
checks.
the canceled checks. That's probably the most, and that was before I went to Lilydale. I decided that I needed to get my act together and start to be a little bit functional. And so I had a day where I cleaned the kitchen, put myself to it, cleaned the kitchen, and cleaned off the island and got rid of everything that was on there. And then the next day I thought, ooh, that was well done, Carol. And I took myself upstairs to our, where we had our office and started on that. And I thought, maybe I can work on the canceled checks and all that entails. So I'm looking, and I knew that the envelope of canceled checks had come in the day, not the day before, no, I'm wrong about that, a couple of days before. And I thought they were upstairs, and I looked upstairs, couldn't find them, and I was really starting to get frustrated. But then I got easily frustrated during those early months. And I looked again and again and again. Finally, I stood in the middle of the office, and I just had my fists clenched, and I said, damn it, Noel, if I'm going to do this, I have to have the canceled checks. I went downstairs, and as I said, I had cleaned off everything from the island. And those checks were on the island in an envelope. And I'm telling you folks, as God lets me stand at this podium, they were not there. Of that I am absolutely positively certain. Because in one of my rushing down to see, might I have left them, I took a look at the island and I thought, well, that was dumb that you cleaned that off yesterday, because it might have been a likely spot for just pitching everything as I was doing at that point. But no, it was bare. So, yeah.
So you got them before.
Yes.
I have a
yes.
second question if I
Yes,
can. Did you start dreaming about him right away, or did that take time?
I'd say time. I would say it took time. Yes. I had one dream that was so vivid that I actually heard him, or thought I heard him, come into the room. I always leave a little bit of room, but the reality is that I would have sworn that he had come in and said, Carol, it's time to get up. I was supposed to go golfing, and I had my alarm set, but it was set for the wrong time, and in essence was saying, get out of bed and get your fanny up there. So, yeah, the dreams came later though, I would say. Now, not a whole lot of time later, not as I look back and I try to process this again, not a whole lot of time. Are there those of you, and you needn't raise your hand please, but are there those of you that are dealing with this right now? Yeah. For one thing, let me say this, please. Do not ever let yourself feel that somehow you're not doing the right thing if he's not coming through. Because believe me, it will happen. It will happen. It's just, I so strongly believe this. And I tell you what, folks, I'm a hard nut to crack by and large. You can ask my friends. Look at Connie sitting back there laughing like a fool. Both of them, they know me too well. Am I not a hard nut to crack?
Yes.
Yes.
She said, that's what she
A March?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, but when you're presented with that much, you just get to the point that you say, okay, all right, I get it. I get it. And again, I'm trying to think if there's anything in here that is pertinent. I will tell you that I have divided the book into 4 parts. There's a Lilydale Take 1, there's a Lilydale Take 2 chapter, and then there is chapter 27, which is Cast Your Spell Upon Me One More Time. And if you get a chance, go. I can tell you, I have a gal there that I think the world of, that she's the one that really, really, how do I say it? She saved me. She made me realize that there's so much more to it than what I thought. As I said, think of it as the fact that God loaned you temporarily a wonderful gift. And it's just that, a gift. And if it's taken away, it's a loan. It's just a loan. And if it's taken away, you're gonna get to reap this more. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Carol, I'm not in that position at this
No,
point.
I know.
However, you know my beliefs on this kind of stuff. And reading your book when I got it, when it was first released, reminded me of things that happened since I've lost my mother
Yes,
and I've lost my best friend. So it's
it's applicable.
right. It
Yes.
is, and reminded me of a few things even my mother would have shared over time.
Mhm.
So it just, thank you, because you made it come to the forefront again. And I said, okay, yeah, I know, Mom, I know.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
so I would say it's a gift beyond, I know that this is a very hard place. I watched my mother go through widowhood, but at the same time, it is, your stories are a gift far beyond that, with, the hope and the expectation that they know, and they're with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, I appreciate that. I will tell you that I have had responses from people in Pittsburgh who have purchased the book, who have said, who have been widowed, and they have said, there's such an empathy there. There is such, you can tie into it and relate to it. And really, I don't ever want to exclude men, because, it is just, when men lose the wife that they have loved forever and ever, it has to be every bit as debilitating, and perhaps not so much more so, but they are saddled with the fact that they can't give in to the emotional response the way women do. And, if we're crying, that's fine, we're crying, that's what we do, but not men. And, so I wouldn't wanna think for a minute that a man couldn't key in on this and be every bit as, in tune, if you will, with the emotions.
I contribute, last summer I attended a bereavement group for widows and widowers. The men in the group were just like the women in the group. They cried as much as the women, their stories were the same as the women.
And they should be able to.
And they came
yes.
every week with their chairs, and it was great for me to learn that it hurts them just as much as a man, maybe more, like you said. It's
because it's just not
How do
the
they
thing to
express it?
release your
And
emotions
the
overtly.
one man shared, he said, my relatives keep telling me to stop crying. He said, how can I stop crying?
No, not the answer.
Yeah, so it was very good, it was a great experience to be with other women going through the same thing, but to have the men there was so helpful. It
Did
was-
you find your bereavement group to be a help to
Yes,
you? Absolutely.
yes.
So did I. I attended one for 6 weeks, that was affiliated with hospice. And an interesting thing about that spin-off for me was that at the end of 6 weeks, the gal who was conducting it asked if I would consider going into schools and talking with kids. I wasn't ready for that just then, but she did convince me that maybe I could do a one-on-one. And I have in here an incident with one little girl that I had who had lost her father. And she was just wiped out, devastated. And so at first she didn't want to talk about it, and that was fine. You know, you don't push that kind of thing. Well, then she got to the point that yes, and finally she said to me, if I tell you something that happened, will you think I'm crazy? And I said, well, no, I don't think you're crazy, not at all. And I said, nothing you could say, I don't think is going to change that. And she said, the day after my dad died, I went out on the picnic bench where we used to sit, and I had my head down on the table and I was crying. And she said, and my dad said, don't cry, I'm just fine. She said, I know you think I'm crazy. And I said, oh honey, no, if you're crazy, so am I. And I wasn't about to give her that kind of information initially, but when she brought it up, I was blown away. Blown away. Well, I don't know if I'm keeping you people over. No, I guess we do have a little bit of time. I have said this. You mentioned a bereavement group. I think they're wonderful. I think, and you know, we can joke and say misery loves company, or you can say, much as I did, that I was going to start a group of, and call it the not so merry widows. But I think this. I think that if you can get with people and talk about it, there's so much to be said for that. There really is, just to be able to sit and talk with other people. And I think, quite honestly, in fact, someone told me, and I can't remember who it was, that there is a group here somewhere of several widows who get together. And I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. If I can ever remember who sent that to me, I'll try to get that to some of you if you're so interested. Anything else? Thank you. Thank you so very much.